Alright everybody, check this out. It's time to finally talk about Doctor Who Series 11, Episode 3, titled Rosa. And the plan for this review, like all of these episode reviews, was to have this out the morning after the episode aired. Unfortunately, due to circumstances, I'll probably have this one up 24 hours later than I'd intended for it to go up, so you're probably going to be seeing this on a Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon. But enough about me and my shenanigans. Let's talk about this episode, which of the 3 episodes we've had so far, I think is undoubtedly the best. And if you don't know the premise by now, it's really simple, actually, and part of why I like this episode so much is that I admire its simplicity. The Doctor, Yaz, Ryan, and Graham go back to 1955, and they encounter Rosa Parks, but unfortunately, they also encounter a weird time-traveling douche by the name of Krasko, who decides he's gonna circumvent Rosa's famous bus sit-in on the eve of, that event happening. And this is another extra-length episode, and I think it really uses its time well. I guess I'll tackle right off the bat that this is an almost universally liked or loved episode from what I've seen. The vast majority response seems to be really, really liking it. But there is, as there often is, a small contingent that seems to have found the episode to be boring, or just generally unenthused with it. Sort of a disclaimer if you're taking this review as a recommendation, which I know no one is. I know that that's not how my audience works. Playing devil's advocate, I will say that this is not, by any means, I don't think, an exciting episode. It's not a traditionally exciting episode, at least. Unlike last episode, though, I'm mostly okay with that. Because Ghost Monument, I felt like, was trying at multiple points to be exciting, and it just never really took. And it had an exciting enough premise, which just wasn't utilized to its full potential, I don't think. This is a very tense episode, Rosa is. There are lots of scenes. The very first scene on the bus between James Blake and Rosa Parks, I was immediately uncomfortable in the best possible way. That's not a feeling I get all the time with this show. It's rare that I get scared by things in Doctor Who. It's even rarer that I just have that sort of dread, even though I know that Rosa Parks lives into old age and that she doesn't die or anything. There are multiple scenes in this episode where I'm just like, oh gosh, this is so uncomfortable, like having to sit through the racism of the 50s. As someone who, thankfully, as a black person, has been very lucky to encounter very little racism directed at myself today, this kind of thing always is sort of like a harsh reminder of really how terrible my country was and how terrible it unfortunately can continue to be to this day. Getting briefly back to the contingent of people who didn't like this episode, outside of those moments of tension, it's not an exciting episode, it's not a fun episode in the traditional sense. It's not an action-adventure thing. It's a pure historical, or the closest thing that we've had to a pure historical in decades. Like, this isn't an episode where the Doctor meets a famous person from the past and also goes on like a sci-fi fantastical adventure with them. Actually, 2 episodes that I've seen this compared to by friends of mine are Vincent and the Doctor and The Unicorn and the Wasp, both of which are episodes that I love for very different reasons. And I feel like if you were to make a scale as to, like, just fun, goofy romp episodes that happen to be set in the past and involving a famous person, and totally grounded, pure historicals that are really more educational and more about really being in the time period and exploring the time period without any sci-fi frills, then I think Rosa is on the far one end and Unicorn and the Wasp is on the far other end, and Vincent and the Doctor is somewhere in between. And I don't know if I prefer Rosa to Vincent and the Doctor. That's something that I have to consider a little bit, because Vincent and the Doctor is like an all-time favorite of mine. I don't know if Rosa is quite an all-time favorite yet. I've watched it 3 times prior to recording this, and it only gets better for me as I watch it again. So I don't know, a couple more viewings and this might be like a top-tier episode for me. I know I prefer it to Unicorn and the Wasp, but really I just appreciate, again, something that I always talk about why I love this show is variety, which is that we can do episodes with very, very similar, broad premises of the Doctor goes back and meets a famous person, and it's sort of a showcase for that artist or that historical figure for the audience, and we can have it feel different each time, because it can be just a really goofy murder mystery type thing, or it can be an exploration of an artist's depression and tackling the ideas of suicidal depression with some layer of seriousness while also fighting a giant space chicken. Or it can be this episode, which is really just a sober sort of examination of this time period and the impact of this woman. And they really do a spectacular job, I think, of capturing that impact because of Ryan and Yaz. And it is really spectacular and kind of unprecedented, I think, to have 2 companions of color in a situation like this where they can commiserate over the fact that the historical figure that they're dealing with in this episode really did affect their life and their livelihood, not directly, but strongly. Like, it almost becomes a kind of meta thing where Ryan and Yaz are only able to have the lives that they have because of the actions of people like Rosa Parks, and also, in real life, their actors are probably only allowed to be on this show because of the actions of people like Rosa Parks. And so on multiple levels, you have an episode that's really about the impact of the historical figure rather than using the historical figure as kind of a novelty, which is, as much as I enjoy it, something that I think Unicorn and the Wasp is a little guilty of, something that The Unquiet Dead is guilty of. Like Charles Dickens, the 2-part opening to Series 6, Richard Nixon, those are examples of, like, the historical figure being there as just kind of a it's fun to have them there thing. And if we're going to make episodes about real people, then I do appreciate the idea that sometimes we can slow down and use the fact that this is a time travel show to really pay tribute to the real person instead of using them as, you know, flavoring to just another weekly adventure romp. But yeah, if you're someone who comes to this show for the adventure romps, or just a really dramatic, heightened sci-fi sense of conflict, then this is not the episode for you. Because literally every person who I've seen hold reservations about Rosa has held them for the same reasons. It's that the conflict wasn't heightened or fantastical enough. It wasn't fun in the way that Doctor Who episodes are usually fun. And if that's sort of what you think Doctor Who should be at all times, then yeah, I can see you having a problem with this episode. But I like that we can throw back to the idea that this show was originally intended to be an educational show. And, you know, one episode every series or so, or every couple of series, or every couple of decades, that's really just sort of an educational thing, is not going to kill anyone, I don't think. So I'm just really glad that we got an episode like this. But that aside, let's actually talk some more about the details of this episode. Because for as much as I say that it's not an outwardly fun episode, there are a lot of neat details that keep me engaged beyond just the impact of Rosa Parks and the exploration of that and the unique feeling that this episode has amongst Doctor Who episodes. The group dynamic between the four, the Doctor, Yaz, Ryan, and Graham, continues to be really interesting and really... I don't know, this is shaping up to be a potential favorite TARDIS crew for me. We'll see how the rest of the series goes, but I'm really liking having 4 people just in general. I'm not someone who has an issue with more than a couple or 3 people in the TARDIS, so now I'm just having that reaffirmed. I like that the episode opens with the confirmation that they've had a couple of trips. What do they say, 9 or 14 trips since between Ghost Monument and now? Because the alternative to that is that we do the Martha thing, where we sort of just take each adventure one after another, and we have that, I feel, kind of contrived element of, okay, this is Martha's last trip. No, this is Martha's last trip. No, really, this time I mean it, last trip, until eventually they just cut that out. I'm glad that we avoid something like that. I'm glad this episode wasn't taking up time with the companions going... I'm glad this episode wasn't taking up time with the companions going, "Hey, Doctor, you were supposed to have us back home already." Or it's like, they've gone on adventures off-screen together, and even though they are still nominally trying to get home, you get the sense that all 4 of them are now just along for the ride. They've tried and failed to get home so many times that they're just fine being a TARDIS crew now. So I'm glad that that transition happened off-screen. That's not something that I needed to see take up time in episodes. And again, Chibnall keeps making decisions like that, which I appreciate. He keeps doing things with the format of the show that feel like decisions I would make. If I were to open a series with the Doctor trying to get these guys home, but I didn't really want that to be the driving narrative force of the whole season, yeah, I would just have them go on a bunch of adventures off-screen and say, you know what, by the time we start episode 3, everyone's just kind of already used to it. And no one's really all that pressed to get back to 2018. Because the thing is, the companions are on a level meant to represent the audience, and the audience wants to be adventuring with the Doctor, so it could have potentially become annoying if we'd spent any time on companions who didn't want to be around for the adventure, you know? So it's good that everyone here, even Graham, who's still kind of the cautious one, is approaching just the idea of time and space adventures with such an enthusiasm. But again, on the subject of this episode not really being an adventure, not really being an exciting romp, I just appreciate the scale of it. When you boil it down, the conflict of this episode is the Doctor and friends trying to get someone on a bus while also making sure that they don't get, persecuted because of the time period. And that's such a small thing, but in a show about someone who, again, going back to The Woman Who Fell to Earth, the mission statement of the Doctor is sorting out fair play throughout the universe. It's in the Doctor's purview, and always has been, I think, to not just fight aliens, or not just deal with monsters, or not just deal with things that are out of the ordinary. The Doctor can take part in and solve very small, ordinary human conflicts. And the way that we usually characterize the Doctor is as someone who would get very bored with that. But when it's something that will have a huge impact on history, I like the idea of the Doctor as someone who yes, can fight aliens, yes, can stop evil time travelers, but also, yes, can take a day out to just make sure that a woman arrives on a bus to help combat injustice on Earth. This is a very sober episode that takes a very serious approach to the issues of racism and segregation, and it's also really nuanced. Like, having Yaz there, who is a Pakistani character who everyone keeps calling a Mexican, that is something that I think really is effective, and again, it's one of those uncomfortable things where it's like, ooh, you knew people were like that, and some people, thankfully now the minority, are still like that, where they can't even be bothered to know the difference between Mexican and Middle Eastern, and the scenes on the bus where Yaz is the odd one out because she doesn't really know where to sit. Like, she has the great line, did coloreds just mean black people in the 50s? And so she just stands because she doesn't know if she can sit with the whites or sit with the coloreds. And speaking of that, the Doctor and Graham's addition to this dynamic is so good, especially with both of the scenes that take place on the bus, because the episode is really subtle about critiquing those two characters for the privilege that they have, where there's a scene on the bus where Rosa is sitting on one side and the Doctor just plops down next to her without thinking about it, and Rosa has to explain, you're a white person, if you sit here I have to move, so could you please move? And the Doctor's like, oh, of course, and she moves up a bit, and that, I think, is foreshadowing for the end of the episode. Spoilers, I guess, I'm in spoiler territory now, you know what, and yeah, at the end of the episode, it comes down to the Doctor and Graham have to be among the white people who are the reason that Rosa has to move, and therefore doesn't move, and therefore gets arrested. And that whole sequence is so uncomfortable, and so poignant, and so powerful, because now those two are incredibly conscious of their privilege, and the camera holds on their faces as Graham says, I don't want to be a part of this. Because the plan up to that point was make sure that enough white people of the time period were sitting on the bus and the rest of them could just get off and let things happen. But now, because they are part of it, the sort of great tragedy and great irony and great sort of statement of purpose from this episode is that we have to watch the Doctor, again, sorting out fair play throughout the universe Doctor, never cruel, never cowardly Doctor, and all of her friends who are good people, forced to be complicit in this horrible injustice. That is, having this woman arrested because she decided to take a seat on a bus. And we hold on the Doctor's face, and she is just so... like, there's just unspeakable things going on in Jodie Whittaker's performance, where the Doctor is a character who we know just cannot let an injustice pass. This is the same character who stopped Hitler getting murdered. This is the same character who couldn't bring himself to destroy the Daleks when he had the chance, going back to their creation with the genesis of the Daleks. And you think about those moments, and you think about the Doctor as a character who historically just cannot ever stand for an injustice happening in front of them when they can stop it. But for the greater good, the Doctor has to be a part of this terrible thing, and really the whole episode, and I don't think the Doctor or the companions or the audience stops to think about it until that moment at the end. The whole episode is us rooting for the Doctor to make this great, kind woman go through this terrible experience. The Doctor and friends make it happen. They make Rosa Parks go through that horrible, moment, and it ultimately, her life is ultimately fine, or as fine as it can be, and her impact makes it all worth it. But in the moment, sitting there on that bus, it's so uncomfortable and terrible for everyone. And that, I think, is just such a human moment and a testament to the power of this show. This is the kind of show that Doctor Who can be when it's firing on all cylinders. It can be an exciting, action-packed, laugh-a-minute thing, and it can also give us moments like this, where everyone just has to kind of sit in silence and not do anything, as real-world, true-to-life evil takes place in front of them. Because, in the end, that's what has to happen. And that's such a loaded moment. With that said, there are actually, I think, a lot of funny lines in this episode, and a lot of kind of light moments. Like, Yaz and Ryan continue to be adorable. I think I ship them. I wasn't sure about it at first, but now I'm like, yeah, I think, I don't know, they're just so cute. Every episode seems dedicated to giving the two of them a little cute moment together. And when they're walking into the window and Yaz mentions having dated this person that they both went to school with, and Ryan's like, he was punching well above his weight. That kind of brings you down in my estimation now. And she's like, did you just indirectly pay me a compliment? It's like, that's so sweet. Like, it's so nice. They're just so nice. All these characters are so nice. And Graham has so many great lines, and I love the way that he kind of just antagonizes James Blake, like, throughout the episode. He's just constantly bothering him and being so passive-aggressive about it and backhanded about it. Like, he's treating him like a good buddy, and Blake is just, like, not tolerant to any of his shenanigans. And it's so cathartic and so fun. And, actually, again, we continue to build on Ryan and Graham's relationship. We mention Grace again, and that's a great moment of Graham mentioning that Grace was a huge fan of Rosa Parks and wishing that she was here with the group to experience all this, and Ryan says, I'm glad she's not here. She would have started a riot. That's a genuinely funny, charming line, and it gives you the impression that Ryan is slowly starting to cope. Like, the Ryan of the previous two episodes would never have been able to have that line. And he's found a way to sort of process, and he's in the process of processing his grandma's death. And meeting Rosa Parks helps him do that. Meeting Martin Luther King Jr. helps him do that. And another great moment between Ryan and Graham is, again, when they just show up at James Blake, who's trying to fish, and they just get all up in his business. And you can tell James Blake is just, like, he's fuming. And they trick him into going back to drive the bus. And it's a real moment of teamwork between the two of them. And they're finally starting to synthesize. And then Graham tries to do a fist bump. And Ryan just is not having it. And that's a funny moment. And it's also such a sad moment for me. Because it's like, there's nothing really wrong or all that lame or cringeworthy about what Graham's trying to do. Like, a fist bump, fine, whatever. Ryan is just putting up all of the barriers, and he's still not quite ready to have that relationship. Even though clearly it's naturally a chemistry that they have, Ryan still has reservations. And that's just throughout the episode. Like, Graham continues to be protective of Ryan, and is always quick and eager to call him his grandson, and for once, Ryan never has a problem with it. I think we're being really subtle and really mature about the handling of the relationship between the two of them specifically. There's a nice little character beat for the Doctor that I really like, in keeping with this being kind of an educational episode, where they find the suitcase belonging to the villain of the episode full of his like time travel junk and nonsense, but when they find it for the first time, everyone kind of has a question about it. Like Graham asks a question, Yaz asks a question, and the Doctor doesn't respond until Ryan asks how they open it, and the Doctor's like, and that is the right question. And it's like, that, again, 13 just has such a curious giddiness about them, and they have, like, lines like that is like they're kind of acting like a teacher for the other three. And, like, there are educational bits all throughout this episode, but that is a little bit seeping in past the best friends relationship into the teacher and assistant's relationship, where it's like, she's teaching them the right questions to ask by the way that she responds, and she doesn't even realize she's doing it. She's just sort of, that's what's on her mind, so that's what gets her excited, and that's what she pays attention to. The Doctor, maybe or maybe not being Banksy is great. There's a scene where she writes up on the wall, and Graham is like, hey, don't do that, that's vandalism, you're not Banksy. And she's like, or am I? And then later on she erases the writing from the wall with the screwdriver, and she's like, Banksy doesn't have that, does he? Or have I? That was a really, it's like, this episode is such a precarious balance of treating the issues of race and racism with deadly seriousness, and yet at the same time, it's not dour, it's not a feel-bad episode. There are feel-good elements to this. It's just, again, not a roller coaster the way that I think people have trained themselves to think Doctor Who should be all the time. I like the continuing running gag from the last two episodes of Ryan continuing to touch things that he shouldn't, and everyone else in the group sort of getting on him or like expecting him to have touched something that he shouldn't have touched. Ryan's dyspraxia doesn't come up at all in this episode. I don't really know if there was a good place to bring it up, but I am hoping that it's, again, with the kind of iffy way that we portrayed his coordination last episode, I'm hoping that we're really careful about that portrayal, just because that's the kind of thing that I could see getting forgotten for a couple episodes at a time, and I don't want to go like 2 or 3 episodes without having that character detail be relevant in some way. I'm very quickly coming to appreciate the musical score by the new composer, Segun Akinola. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But it didn't stick out to me much during The Woman Who Fell to Earth. There were a couple of pieces that I liked during Ghost Monument, and all throughout this episode there are bits of music that I really appreciate. And it feels very different to Murray Gold, like both eras of Murray Gold. There were moments throughout the Russell T Davies era where Murray Gold's score was kind of this grungy techno stuff that I did not like at all, and other moments, and especially throughout the Moffat era, where it became very focused on orchestra and getting Stephen Moffat's very fairy tale vibe, or again sort of big melodramatic action movie or just drama type score. And I like Murray Gold's tracks. Like, there's so many Murray Gold tracks that I listen to on the regular apart from the show, and I think I'm starting to get some Segun Akinola tracks that I'm gonna try and find. I could track them down. The only really other thing to mention about this episode is probably the weakest part, and that's the villain, Krasko, who's the cause of all this trouble. He's back in time to stop Rosa Parks getting on the bus. And I like that we're vague at first about what his motivations are, and by the end of the episode it turns out he really is just a terrible racist from the 75th century. And I know that some people have a problem with this episode where it's like, they can't buy that someone from that far in the future would be that racist, and I don't know what to say other than I wish I could have that problem, but, I don't know, man. Like, that's something that's perfectly reasonable to me, and that's just sad, I think. Unfortunately, though, Krasko, outside of that element, and the way that he's taken out, which is quite rushed, but I think a nice little victory moment for Ryan, he's just not that interesting. He serves his purpose, which is to be a tool to help us tell this otherwise great story. And, yeah, we're just, 3 episodes in, we're kind of lacking for a great villain. So, I'm still hoping that, we eventually get one of those. But yeah, man, I don't know. This was a spectacular episode. I've seen it 3 times already. I am going to see it a 4th. As of right now, best of the 3, no question. And that actually is saying a lot because I also like The Woman Who Fell to Earth more, the more that I watch it, but this is a step above, man. So, again, tune into the Red Lightning channel in a day or in a couple of days to see myself and my friends go a bit more in depth with this episode and particular moments, and also to briefly talk about Ghost Monument because we haven't gotten to that yet. That channel, again, I'll be linking in the description, along with my Twitter, and yeah, follow me there. You can find me on Facebook, you can subscribe, like if you enjoyed the video, and tune back in next week when we talk about spiders.